we go also for round two for Corey, who's going to introduce our next guest for another exciting fireside chat. So please give again a warm round of welcome for a longtime Texavania supporter and awesome entrepreneur, Corey. Please come on stage.
I was spending some time with Tijana earlier today talking about this subject, keeping the startup heart while scaling up. And it's something I feel really, really strongly about as it relates to the success of a startup and frankly the happiness of the team at the startup, which impacts their personal lives as well, which then flywheels back to the startup and perpetuating the success of it. And I found myself thinking about the brain, which is pretty important to our body, right? And then neurons within the brain, which are delivering information, which make it so that we can work. And surrounding the nucleus of that, the most important part is the soma, right? And as I thought about that, I thought, okay, well, what she's talking about is the culture of a company, and that's the nucleus. And you gotta protect it at all costs. It's more important than the product, in my opinion. And then surrounding that culture is the soma, or what Tijana's going to talk about today, of the way to protect that culture and the way to enhance that culture and feed it. So I'm really, really excited about it. And the other key takeaway I had from my conversation with her is, well, it was really multiple. It's damn, she's smart. And two, she's really passionate about this subject and knowledgeable. I learned in just a 15-minute conversation, and I've been at this a while, so thanks, Tijana. And maybe if you could take just a moment and share your background with everybody and then launch in, that would be great.
Sure. Hello, everyone, and thank you for your introduction to the topic today. My name is Tijana, and I originally come from Serbia, which is your neighboring country. However, I spent the past good 12 to 15 years working around the world. First in the corporate world, where I learned a lot about how do you do things at scale. And then I went into tech and scale-ups and actually fell in love with how they operate, right? So startups and scale-ups world. I work in a company called Happening, so probably a lot of you were asking as well, what is Happening? Because it has this really fun name. Happening is a technology organization. We are actually present in good 4 countries when it comes to where we employ people. Our key markets are Romania, actually Bucharest. However, we also sometimes employ people remotely, so please don't be shy if you're from Cluj to actually join us. Also, we are present in Zagreb, where we have a lot of people, London and Brussels as well. We grew up a bit organically, however, also through acquisitions, and we belong to the Superbet group, which means we also build this proprietary platform for gaming and sports betting for all our acquisitions, which are actually Superbet, Napoleon, Lucky 7, and we keep on growing as a company. So it's a strictly tech company, but in a betting and sports gaming industry. So today, I definitely want to kind of touch upon what kind of keeps us in a startup mode rather than a corporate mode.
Yeah, so bureaucracy can kill the startup, right? And it, in my opinion, kills everything, which is why I hate big companies. But how do you avoid that proactively, even?
Exactly. So let's say, our secret sauce to that is first we really fight against it every day, and we frequently have these conversations that you can see right here on the screen about, whenever you think about, oh, I need a new process or I need a framework, right? Do you first, you need to ask a question like, do you really need it? Are you at the scale where you really need to put this into a process map, right? That's useful. As you scale, you do need some processes and frameworks. However, then you should really decide, okay, at which kind of, because they're kind of polar opposites from, talking about things philosophically in terms of, this is the way we do things around here, right? This is our culture, this is how we wish to behave, these are some of the principles we operate by, versus talking in policies and rules, right? What you will find most of times, even in corporate environments that I was part of, 50,000 people companies and, so on, you will find that actually these policies and rules are so strict that most common thing is actually to avoid them, and people find around ways to actually avoid them, right? To cut through them. So we do this really intentionally, and we really focus only on principles, recommendations, and guidance, right? So we guide people rather than tell them what to do. We say, actually, when we talk about, let's say, people policies, right? We say, we actually have an education budget. These are the ways you can use your education budget, and it's roughly set at this amount at a team level, right? So you allow for enough flexibility, and actually you allow enough common sense to start being in those conversations between people, between managers, right? Now, of course, all of this also depends on the size and the maturity of your organization. Also in terms of maybe when you're in a regulated business, you might have some very strong rules, for example, about security, because you just can't make this risk. However, actually in most of the cases, you will find that you actually don't need a policy. Maybe sometimes not even a process for doing certain things.
So as you think about culture, right, it feels like in popular culture, there's an idea that you provide a table tennis table and a foosball and some free food and maybe a tapped keg, and that's culture, right? But what are some of the skills you think about to create that culture, and how do you drive it?
Yeah, I will talk, maybe if I actually switch to my previous slide, right? For this kind of mindset to work, because, when you think about this graphic of, philosophy, right? It all sounds really super intangible, right? However, if you think about it, there are certain skills, mindsets, and behaviors we all need to, because that's culture, basically, how we behave towards each other in everyday conversations, how we do things. Even though there are many, very correct definitions of cultures, but I love these random ones. And when you think about it, this is, for example, leadership skills are one of the great, I would say, enablers of companies that can still keep the startup heart beating rather than going into a corporate mode, because leaders can then critically make some decisions around very vague, ambiguous frameworks, however, still allow for this freedom, autonomy, and empowerment to actually make things happen, rather than being, forced into some boxes, policies, and all of these things. And then another thing, definitely awesome change management and communication skills. This is something that I think a lot of startups fail at, because actually a lot of times you would see a lot of change, but then people are not really, let's say, acquainted with these changes, right? So you need to communicate. Slack as one of the communication tools for most of the startups. You have these things that you need to constantly, maybe even repeat 10 times, because it's better to over-communicate than under-communicate, right? And the third thing I would definitely, maybe the main thing, is the mindset of trust and a growth mindset and everything that comes together. Because for these, I would say, very intangible cultures to work, you actually need a lot of trust. You need a lot of being comfortable with making mistakes, right? But giving really good feedback. If you think, for example, I used a certain recommendation or guidance in a wrong way because it's very broad and ambiguous, right? You need to give me feedback, and we need to talk honestly about, actually, this is how I understood it, right? And we need to also talk publicly about these things, right? So a lot of crowdsourcing opinions, knowledge, and making people connect over, what is a good decision when it comes to a guidance for a certain thing.
That sounds hard. It sounds complicated. How do you sustain that?
Exactly. So this is also one of the questions I get a lot from startups sometimes, and a lot of founders that I sometimes collaborate with. And this is also, how do we sustain this culture as we grow? We all know that culture is very hard to sustain as you get those people. Somebody, I can't remember who, was talking about the first 100 people, how first you hire your 10 people, and then those 10 people hire their 10 people, right? But then that's easy, right? Sustaining the culture at 100 people. However, when you evolve, actually, with 500 people, it's very hard to sustain that culture, that speed, that entrepreneurial spirit. So how do we do that at happening, right? Is we focus on really only key three things. One is still we focus really on who we hire, promote, and fire. This is, by the way, one of also the fun definitions of culture. Sometimes I know that firing seems really maybe aggressive. However, I would even call out promotions more than hiring and firing, right? Promotion is a direct, let's say, demonstration of what good looks like in a company, right? But what good looks like not in just a technical sense. Oh, I have this, great engineer and he's an amazing performer, but also how is he collaborating? How is he communicating, or a she as well? Hopefully more she's in this profession as well. And then another thing that I think we often forget in the startup world is how we need to be intentional about routines and rituals that we have as a company. A lot of times you will see people saying, let's say, okay, every month we will have all hands calls, right? Where everybody comes together, we talk about some updates, company news, goals, and stuff like that. However, how intentional are we about organizing that really well, gathering people around the topics that we really want them to talk about? And we've made these mistakes in the past, right? We organize parties for the sake of parties, right? Like, guys, let's have some beers and, let's just have fun. Now we're thinking differently about that because we realize that, we should organize even fun around things this company cares about. For example, building great products, enticing our customers, right? So how can we bring that spirit of what we believe into our routines, into our rituals as a company? And the third thing, and this is not because of my bias, because I spent a lot of time in leadership development actually, but it's really because leaders are your multipliers of culture, right? Who you promote into a leader position, again, not only is a demonstration of what good looks like, it's also about what is the impact of this person and their behavior on the wider group of people. And this is something, unfortunately, I thought that many startups don't do well. And partly, this is because we promote a lot internally, right? Which causes this because, of course, you grow as the organization and you're like, okay, this person becomes a manager tomorrow. But did these people really scale into proper leaders? And that's something we take really, really seriously. So we invest a lot in developing leaders at certain levels in the organizations.
That's awesome. Thank you. So you talked about 500 employees, right? And as I think about people, I think about individual, complex, emotional beings with very different upbringings, et cetera, even if it's in the same geographical area. And so how do you focus on people with all the differences?
Yeah, that's maybe a third thing that I have to say today. So I would say this is probably the key to culture, really being focused on your people. But when I say focused on your people, it means understanding these people. And many times I hear a lot about, the trends of future work and this trend and that trend. But I think we need to start talking about the why. Is this a trend, right? And I will just mention maybe one thing as an example. We have recently seen this really strong pushback of return to the office, which I have no let's say no particular opinion about. I just don't like it being so forceful. I don't believe that in today's generation we can afford to force adults to do anything, right? So my solution to this and my proposition to all of you who are maybe even working for some companies, so maybe you tell your organizations how to do things differently, is really kind of following behavioral changes in employee expectations, right? And what I mean by that, I'm just gonna go through a couple of these. Like here are some images, right? But then I'm gonna tell you about what is driving those changes. And I think not enough people spend time talking about what is driving. We all talk about trends, but then, to really understand the trend, you need to focus on the why it came as a trend in the first place, right? And that offers a lot of more insight into what can you do to actually enable that. So first trend I want to talk about is actually transparency. Transparency is a major trend, and this trend is also basically came about because we started using products, services, and events around us, social events that happen around us, drive our changes in expectations. So for example, a company called Wise, my previous company, I love them still very much and use the product. So for example, Wise is a fintech organization that is built on an idea of transparent fees when you're transferring your money, right? And that is actually fighting against the banks who are maybe not telling you what is going to cost you to transfer $100 from, I don't know, US to Europe, right? And then take you 50 out of those 100 and without you knowing, right? And then when you think about, let's say, using that product, right? You're saying like, you know what? If a bank or this app can tell me how much money is this going to cost me and can be fully transparent about, no those little notes, right, in the product, but it can be fully transparent about what are my expectations. How come a company or, for example, I don't know, my employer or manager cannot be transparent about what are the expectations, what are the salary ranges we are offering, right? So a lot of transparency trends coming from products we use are actually kind of, you know, floating over to the work world, right? Another thing I wanted to mention is the trend of the flexibility and choice. Here, probably most of you are using Glovo, right, the delivery application, or Uber, right, Bolt or Uber. In this case, right, when you think about it, if I can, you know, choose today, am I going to have Mexican food or am I going to have Chinese food? And then somebody at work tells me that I cannot choose maybe my laptop that I'm going to use, right? I'm thinking, wow, that's really kind of, you know, not very modern way of thinking, right? So a lot of flexibility and choice is required to actually manage humans at work. Another thing is about autonomy and empowerment. Just as a, you know, little screenshot I did, I love these screenshots and polls that big companies do. And this screenshot is actually from LinkedIn, right? The poll that actually Revolut did, which was like quite a few months ago, maybe even now 6 months to a year ago. And they did this poll about, you know, oh, do you prefer to work at home? Do you prefer to work 2 days in the office, hybrid, or from anywhere, right? And as you can see, it's quite a sizable poll response, like 17,000 plus people responded. And I thought, you know what, as an HR people person, I should definitely look at this because probably Revolut customers are approximately this generation that I am employing in my workplace, right? But my key to this screenshot is not about, oh, 39% of people said that they like to work at home. It's about observing that actually there is 4 different choices and that true autonomy empowerment comes from having a place for all of these styles, right? Not just like, oh, 30% of people, or like, even if it's 56%, like a majority said this. It doesn't really matter. People are not a majority. People are not a group. People are individuals, right? So I think this empowerment, autonomy, personalization will become increasingly important in employee expectations. And we're already seeing that. Another thing is user experience, right? Generally also the speed of information you're expecting. User experience, right? We all use iPhones, you know, Samsung, Android, whatever you're using. Maybe somebody uses a Google phone as well. That's also probably forcing us to think, you know what, why is this system at work so clunky? You know, how come my daily experience since I wake up and look at my, you know, Insta, Facebook, or work emails, right? Why does it look so much better than what I'm using at work, right? And this happens also in our organization. We're constantly working on that. But kind of being aware of this, that, you know, what people do in their private lives actually influences how they act in their business lives is probably the best thing to understand at this moment. And the last 2 things, and maybe as we're in Romania, and I say this with great humbleness because I'm from Serbia, and maybe Southeast Europe is not that, I would say, we're not a very diverse environment. So, you know, when I post things like Black Lives Matter, maybe that's not so relevant for Romania. But I argue that, you know, this is just one of the movements I wanted to talk about. Fairness as social impact becomes probably like within top 3 trends when it comes to employee expectations in terms of, let's say, employees needing to know that their employers are actually making the right ethical decisions about the business. And for example, if somebody told me 15 years ago, when I started, maybe even more now, started working, if somebody told me like, oh yeah, you know, you will expect this from your employer to take a stance on, let's say, a certain event that happened in the world, maybe it's a war or whatever, I would be like, oh, what do I have to do with that as an employee, right? Nowadays, employees are forcing their employers to take a public stance. So you can see on LinkedIn, okay, this company changed into, you know, pride flag during the Pride Month. This company, you can, you know, think about it whatever you want, but this is all driven actually by employee expectations, right? And then a third thing I really want to kind of close these trends about and kind of invite you all to think about it, especially if you're managers and if you're managing people. COVID-19 really just, I would say, probably amplified this trend, but people have more and more need to be treated really like humans, I would say, which means with a lot of, you know, well-meant intentions and also with a lot of care, right? And a lot of employees will not just work because, you know, you set goals for them and, you know, these are the, you know, they will really work and put this extraordinary effort and discretionary effort only if you actually show you care for them, right? So this becomes also a great, I would say, probably something that is very hard for managers nowadays as well. So, you know, these kind of trends are driving a lot of, I would say, pressure on the managers. But definitely well-being and care, I would say, is one of the things that employers and managers and the businesses need to show clearly towards their people.
Awesome, thank you. So, see what I mean? Damn intelligent, really knowledgeable, and really passionate about the nucleus, which is fantastic. So, I mean, you covered a lot of stuff, right? You got a couple of minutes. Can we take a couple of questions if there are any?
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions?
More than happy.
It's tough to see. There's one right here.
Exactly. The pandemic, I would say, because I... yeah, exactly. I will repeat the question exactly for all of you who haven't. How did the pandemic shape the communications between the teams and collaborations within the teams, right? I would say, because I actually worked in a different company when this happened, right? I was actually working in WISE at that time. We were, again, very intentional about our response, right? Communication is something that you need to intentionally plan. You cannot just let it, you know, kind of wiggle out from your plans. So when I was at my previous company, right, what we did, we really, again, just like I told you, insisted on these team routines. Even, I would say, when people started saying, I don't want to do another virtual dancing class and I don't want to do another virtual coffee because, you know, people got a bit sick of this approach, right? We still said, let's leave this as an option, right? And, you know, because people were actually lonely, right? You know, trapped in their houses. And I would say just by being very intentional, I would say, you know, our culture probably even kind of grew a bit from that point onwards, because first we became really super fast. We realized that remote work can actually enable us sometimes to be faster, right? Can enable the global collaboration at scale. So we took, I would say, the best of this. But I would say for any such how to say, a situation that is sudden or whatever, you really need to have a proper, again, routine and ritual how you're going to manage that, which, again, I think a lot of startups don't do. You know, they don't take communication and change management super seriously. They're like, oh, we're just going to do this, right?
So one of the key messages I'm hearing is to be thoughtful, proactive, plan, implement, monitor, right? Because if you just let it happen, over time you're then sort of grabbing parts to try and put it together, and it ends up being like Frankenstein, right? Where it looks like it should sort of work, but sort of doesn't and breaks down in a lot of weird ways. So is it cool, I didn't ask her ahead of time, but is it cool if people have questions as they're working on their startups or thinking about one they might create or even are at one and have questions, right, that they could contact you?
Absolutely.
Can you share your contact info?
That's actually why I left my email. I don't know if we are still allowed to show I don't see it. Time is up. But anyway, if anyone wants to contact me, you will find me on the list of the speakers, and feel free. My surname and name exactly looks like the same on LinkedIn. So feel free to contact me. I'm always ready to share practices. I really believe in open source information. So, if you need anything, I'm always ready to help. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.